All right, very good. So as I was saying, last week, Jeremiah, hot and dry, hot and dry. This week, Isaiah, which is really the antidote to summer because it's a little hot and dry, but it's also this vision of well-watered springs and a lush future and all the promises of God coming true. So you kind of get the other side of the coin as well. I want to start with this memory I had when I was reading this passage, which has a lot of if and then in it. I had this college friend named Brian Mitchell from Houston, kind of a surfer dude mentality. He's always really chill, but he carried in his pocket a pocket copy of Rudyard Kipling's poem, If. Do you remember that poem? It may be years ago since you've heard it, but it had been given to him by his father because it's a great father-son gift. And he really treasured it. And he wasn't a particularly religious person, but he really treated that poem as a sacred text. And I'm going to read it to you this morning just because I just ran across it again. I'm going, this is just really such good. It's just universally timeless. And also because it follows the same kind of literary structure of our passage in Isaiah, which is all about conditions and consequences, right? It's all about this connection between context and conduct and character and consequences. You like all those C's? That's like some old school preaching right there. I mean, 4 or 5 C's strung out together. All right, so here we go. If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or be lied about, don't deal in lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. Yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Isn't that good stuff? Or a woman, or a person, or a real authentic human being, right? So like I said, that poem came to mind because what Isaiah is up to in this passage this morning is really laying out these kinds of what God is really looking for from us and what God promises in return. So let's hear the text. If somebody would read Isaiah 58, 9b, so the second half of verse 9 through 14, and then we'll come back and unpack it a bit. You all can read. You can't you?
I'll do it.
Okay.
If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places, and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. If you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interests on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interests, or pursuing your own affairs, Then you shall take delight in the Lord, and I will make you ride upon the heights of the earth. I will feed you with the heritage of your ancestor Jacob, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken.
So let it be. Amen. So what do you think is at the heart of the occasion that Isaiah utters these words on behalf of God? What do you think is the problem? What's he trying to address here? And you can look back at the first part of chapter 58 if you want, but I think you can probably ferret it out. What's going on?
Self-interest over service to God.
Okay, so that last passage, there's a lot of your own this, your own this, your own this, your own this, right? So self-interest, self-absorption is a big part of the problem. What else?
They're oppressing somebody.
Okay, so there's a lot of oppression going on. There's a lot of unethical behavior going on. Okay, needs to be addressed. Yeah, it's not entirely clear in these select verses, but if you kind of expand out to the first part of this chapter, what you see is that there is this conflict, and that the people are ostensibly doing all the religious stuff, right? They're doing the rituals, they're fasting specifically is called out here. But the country, the community collectively is not prospering. In other words, the problems religiously is, but God, we're going to church and we're singing the songs and we're fasting, right? And we're reading the scriptures aloud, but you're not hearing our prayers. You're not giving us what we want. And he's like, yeah, but. Yeah. And so the occasion here is really that at this point in Isaiah, which is the end of the book, and if you know something about the literary or the theological history of Isaiah, there are theories about whether Isaiah is a unified whole or whether it's Deutero, 2 Isaiahs, or even Tritero, 3 Isaiahs, because there's such a long period of time. And we think the best scholarship says that there's probably was a school of prophets in the tradition of Isaiah that began with his authentic proclamation and then, extended it and applied it in the spirit of Isaiah. But the tone definitely changes from the beginning of Isaiah to the post-exile kind of commentary here. But more likely than not, we have the God's people who've been exiled to Babylon. They've come home now, and what they've come home to, is like Gaza, right? I mean, everything has been destroyed, right? Everything, the vineyards have been torn up, like everything is just chaos. And they're faced with this daunting challenge of not only rebuilding the physical nation, but rebuilding their relationship with God. They've been in exile for 70 years. They feel guilty. They feel ashamed. God has said, you're being carried off because of your failings as a nation, right? And you're commingling of true religion with false religion like we saw in Jeremiah. And now you've come back and you want to rebuild, not just you want to see economic and prosperity, right? A civic life that reemerges and a cultural life that reemerges, but your whole worship, your whole approach to God, right, needs to be reconstructed, and your whole identity needs to be reconstructed, and all of that. And so you're doing the old things, right? Fasting's good, so we're going to fast, and yet you're still missing the biggest piece, right? And of course, it's this perennial problem we see throughout the scriptures and throughout the prophets especially, is that there's always with us this temptation to replace our relationship with God with religious ritual, and specifically to neglect the holy character of God and the ethical behavior that God demands with kind of a shortcut religion that says, yeah, but if we just do the offerings and we sing the songs, isn't that enough? Right? And that really is based on this pagan notion, by the way, that you have to get the God's attention by doing ritual stuff. And if you do the ritual stuff right, then the gods pay attention to you and they give you what you want. It's a very pagan idea, but that's not how Yahweh operates. In fact, Yahweh, theologically, it's the very opposite of that. Yahweh is like, no, I'm always here. I always see. I don't miss a detail, right? And so anything you do is not to get me to show up, because I'm already here. I'm trying for you to be like me, and for society to reflect my holiness and my loving character. And that's the part you're missing, because it's the harder part. So let's dive in and see a little bit what he says in these first two verses, 9b through 10. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. What do you think the ethical problem is here? Specific terms or even more or broader terms? If you remove the yoke from among you, and by the way, the yoke is mentioned again in this chapter in verse 4. So just to kind of highlight that. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and in striking, it's in 6. Is not this the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, set the oppressed free and break every yoke? So what are we talking about here? If you remove the yoke from among you.
It could be, sometimes I think it's this tendency to establish and maintain human hierarchy.
Okay.
And that's the pointing fingers is like a diminishment of it, or just calling out another.
Okay.
And it may not have to be a negative, it's just like, you're just different than me, or you think different than me. By saying that, or by having the thought and then verbalized out or behaved out, it creates hierarchy, or it maintains the idea of hierarchy
Okay.
in society.
Okay, so good. So this is a communal sin, right? It is you're carving up, right, God's people with those who are somehow superior and those who are inferior, and this creates a form of oppression. The yoke, by the way, what is that? Where do we derive that from? What is a yoke?
It's an instrument on a piece of cattle. It doesn't have to be a cow, but it's you put it on a cow to steer them to do work for you.
Yeah. So it's a wooden, we know, wooden or wooden leather combination, whatever, right? It's an instrument, it's an implement, as my grandfather would say, right? It's an implement. We got an implement shed, that's where the implements are. If y'all are from Texas, you know that's just how it works, right? And it's an implement, and it's an implement often oxen or cattle, often to pull plows and things, right? And it harnessed their power for the use of the human. It is a thing for beasts. It is something used for control. The hierarchy is the humans behind, and whatever's under the yoke is under the control of the person in control. And their labor is being exploited, not for the good of the animal necessarily, but for the good of the person. So you're exactly right. The yoke is a symbol of oppression, and whatever's going on among these people of God, one group is oppressing the other group, right? And so God is never going to answer your prayers, Isaiah says, until you address this problem of the exploitation of other human beings for your own benefit.
Isn't God also saying, or Isaiah, putting a yoke on others puts a yoke on you?
Well, it is interesting that, of course, Jesus invokes the metaphor of the yoke in Matthew. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart. Right? So he reclaims this idea of the yoke, and he subsumes himself under the yoke, right? And makes us a co-laborer with him in the kingdom of God. So it's a very profound kind of inversion that Jesus does with the yoke. In Isaiah's context here, he wants a yokeless world, right? He's casting a vision where human beings do not do this to one another. And isn't it so, I mean, it's just so ancient, and yet it's so relevant today, isn't it? Let's just talk about that. Let's zoom forward, right? What would be the modern day practical application if a modern day prophet told the American people like you and me, all right, if you remove the yoke from among you, the way you operate as a society, as a culture, if you remove the pointing of the finger and the speaking of evil about people in your community. Put a face on it.
You wouldn't be talking about the lazy people that are on Medicaid. You wouldn't
Right.
be imposing, you know, all of the 38 million people on Medicaid that ought to be working.
Right. Yeah.
Could, he probably would've been like, people in Isaiah, they probably would've said, what yoke? That's probably what we would do today.
Yeah.
We don't acknowledge that we do that.
I don't even see a yoke.
And the reason that they say what yoke is because you've created the systems of injustice, so you're not like personally, you convince yourself you're not personally responsible.
Yeah. Or you are inherently supreme, right? You are just inherently better, right? And so that's why bigots never confess their bigotry, because they, by definition, a bigot means, you know, you are better, right? Go try to get a bigot to confess. They can't even see it. Like, they don't see the yoke, right?
Well, that's like Elon Musk, for example, calling people non-player characters, you know, because most of, I saw a quote where he talks about most of the world are NPCs, which is a video game term for somebody that's an actor in a video game that isn't really a participant in the game. And
Yeah.
doesn't have agency, you just got a few people that are actually playing the game, and everybody else, and everybody else is just non-player.
They're just Oompa Loompas, right? Another Blue Wall group, sorry. Well, we were talking about this week in the context of the book that we're reading that I'll reference in a minute. You know, when Hillary Clinton famously, regrettably, called people deplorables, right? She was doing the very same thing from the left, right? And so this is very much a modern day thing. And just to make it a little bit more personal, you know, there's a lot of ways that American culture has yoked other people in the world. And we benefit from it, even people like us. And this is where it starts to get really personal. You know, in fact, part of the great economic turmoil that we're in right now is precisely because Americans long ago decided that they would live off the sweat of people in other places, right? And now we don't make clothes in America anymore because they're all made, you know, in other places around the world. And so we got addicted to cheap labor. And now I'm sounding like someone on the right wing, but I mean, some of these things are just flat out true, right? And because we've been comfortable with yoking other people outside our borders and not looking at it and not thinking about it, right? So if today the modern day prophet said, you need to take the yoke off, I mean, no one is free from the accusation, right? No one is free from seeing other people, othering people, right? And saying malicious things about them, pointing the finger to justify your own righteousness. Remember what was at the heart of all of this, right, was this misguided idea that the individual's righteousness was the most important thing, right? So go on to 58:10. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday. What's the fundamental problem with fasting in this context? We're fasting as a form of personal worship, right? But you're not doing what we want. What did God really want?
Feeding the hungry.
What's that?
Feeding the hungry.
Yeah, God's like, I don't care if you don't eat, I want you to give your food away. Right? See, it's this twisting of kind of private piety for self-satisfaction and self-aggrandizement when God says, but what I really want, right, is I want you to give the food away. With that, you're just missing the whole point. I mean, the ritual of fasting can be a wonderful ritual, but it's supposed to silence your own hungers and desires, right? So that you can better obey God's desires, right? But the very thing that they weren't doing is that they would fast for themselves, but then they would ignore the hungry people all around them, right? So what do you make of this promise? Then your light shall rise in the darkness and your gloom be like the noonday.
My sense is that individually we're wired, like we have the human capacity to connect to divinity, to the universe, and we don't use that as much as that capacity is there. So we connect to God. And there's the imagery of light is one of the things that happens for me when I'm actually connecting to God. It's very, very light and illuminating and revealing and like shines through, kind of through into the body and through the body, and you feel this connection to the rest of the planet. It's just different. It just takes me out of me and puts me into the community a little better. So that's kind of what I don't know if that's what you wanted.
Yeah, no. It's not what I want. It's
That
what you hear,
confession,
right?
I was like,
Yeah, no. It's what you hear, and it's true. Biblically, the metaphor of light, right, carries with it, the light of truth, the light of goodness, the light of beauty, the light of the presence of God. I mean, it's such a rich metaphor, right? But I think what Isaiah is saying here is that which is the ultimate expression of humanity, right? Our light. That it only occurs when essentially we're loving God and loving neighbor, right? That true human light exists and it can come into being, and it is what God wants. God wants humanity to shine. We were created to shine. So there, in this promise, there's like this promise of potentiality. Look at what it could mean to be human if your worship and your ethical life were perfectly aligned. It would be glorious. I mean, it's Jesus invoking a city on a hill cannot be hidden. So let your light shine before men, right? This is the full promise and intention of God, but it will not happen by mere pursuit of self-interest.
Well, it strikes me as more ethically based.
Okay.
The older pagan religions, what I know of them, where everybody's waiting on the gods in the sky to do things and doing things to appease the gods. Judaism comes in, says there's one God, so everybody can't have their tribal gods. And if one God, then one broad ethical base.
Yeah.
And what something you said sparked me that theology is living out.
Right.
It's not just sitting back and being favored by God. We were created in image and likeness of God, and therefore empowered by God to work with God.
Yeah.
In creating to be like Jesus.
Yeah, good.
Beforehand, yes.
Yeah, and the community is not just us and God, me and Jesus in my pocket, right? It's me and God and everybody else. And the problem is when Americans, and especially people who grew up in American Christianity, hear this text, we almost invariably read it personally, where the you is individual and not communal, right? So we come to a text like this, like, well, what do I have to do so I can get what I want? Oh, well, I have to remove the yoke, and then God will give me what I want, right? And then my light will shine, and my gloom will still be happy. It's not what he's saying at all. He's saying collectively, as a community, as a nation, you will radiate goodness, truth, and beauty, and even the gloomiest among you will know joy. It'll be like noonday, because collectively, you have cared for one another. You have respected one another. You have emulated God's relationship among yourselves. You've made it manifest, right? And so he's extending this amazing vision of the future. This is what we were talking about this week also, this book we were reading called Abundance, that there's this lack of vision in America today for who out there in the future, not going back again, right, but who we can be together. And it's not being articulated very well. We're struggling for people who know how to stand it up and say it in a fresh way that is accessible to everyone.
If it's the new, you hear a lot of talk about like the new Israel, and Christians are, the new Israel, and the call to Abram, which is kind of what this is all harkening back to, is he's gonna make you a great nation, but the reason he's making you a great nation is so that you bless the entire earth. You know, you'll demonstrate how it is to be in right relationship with God, and that's then puts us in the role of co-creation with God and acting in the image of God.
Yeah.
And changing the entire earth, but it wasn't ever about the people of Israel as a nation. And if you're gonna use the language of, you know, Christianity's, you know, kind of the new Israel, then you ought to adopt well, then we should be about making things better for the whole earth.
Yeah, exactly. And to even get closer to home, you may have seen an article this week, and I won't remember all the sources, but there was a left-leaning think tank this week that came out a list of the 40 words they wish liberals would stop using. And it was very indicting. Indicting, right? Because they're like, nobody talks like this, right? Nobody outside the far left even uses these words, right? Not only do they not know what you're talking about, they're already offended by all these phrases. And there are things, I'm not even gonna recite them right now because they're things we hear every day in our church. And we would argue that, but these are accurate words, right? All the therapeutic language we use, right? That these are accurate words, these are educated words, these are words that have been honed to help support all these groups that are really important to us, and rightfully so. But we're using this language that is not accessible to half the country. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, but, and I kind of saw that same list.
You saw it, yeah.
And my first thought was realizing that those words give dignity to the people that are being harmed.
They
Right?
do,
Right.
they do.
That those words are words that lift those people to a different level.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm trying to think of one of them, unhoused, I believe. is-
Yeah, that's one of them, yeah.
Yeah, homeless. To
Well,
be
not homeless, they unhoused
Wait,
specifically,
wait,
or
I'm
those
saying-
living, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
To be homeless, okay, is a label that denigrates and takes your humanity.
Yeah,
To be a person who is experiencing homelessness gives me dignity. So where those words may, you know, be just words to some people,
yeah.
to those that are affected, it lifts them, it gives them dignity.
I agree wholeheartedly with you. And when I read that list, I felt all this pain and tension in my soul because.
Yeah, you do.
I was totally triggered. That's what-
Yeah. I know the history of a lot of those terms, and I know why they're there and why they're frankly superior terms.
Yeah, and I understand, I totally understand. I mean, we have to change woke, we have to, I mean, but at the same time, it is at the expense of people who are oppressed and
Yeah.
marginalized.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm so sympathetic, right? And I just think we have to figure out a way that just incrementally moves back toward accessible language without going back to all of the abusive terms and reductionist terms, you know, that we've used in the past. Or certainly read the room. Right, that we're in a certain context, and they lifted up some examples, like Pete Buttigieg, you know, is brilliant at this. He speaks in certain contexts, and he uses words and phrases that are just accessible. So anyway,
No.
and they had a few others that were good examples, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the poem that you read earlier. It is about like intent. The only way that you cross those barriers is that when you use that language, it's not used to say, this is the correct language and yours is the wrong language. It's starting a conversation and saying, like, this is what it means to me. I get that, you know, it's a different context for you. Not that my language is right, your language is wrong, because that's the posture that too often it's couched in.
Yeah, and we get hung up on the language, and we really need to get past the language to the problem.
But
And
So we get hung up on who's right, who's wrong.
Right.
But I think the language, kind of to dig into this more, it's the language, as was said well, was that it gives this richness of context that when I was growing up, learning language, it wasn't present. And so it's enriched me, right, the language terms, and so now there's this argument that said, well, that's language that's being rejected by others. So we need to be sensitive, so our now consciousness says, well, at least I've got this new language to start a conversation, but then that's not accessible to my brother or to my sister. Their minds kind of explode with just the term.
Yeah.
And,
And
so
then we attack each other over terms.
yeah, but language is appropriate for expressing my emotions, and I have to accurately identify what they are and use the language for that. And I think that gets caught up in those terms too. So I think the terms are inclusive of emotion.
Well, sometimes it's kind of, I know you're gonna say something, let me just say one quick thought. It's kind of profanity too, where you can be the kind of Christian that goes around correcting
Fair.
everybody's cuss words.
Fair enough.
Right, or you can develop a kind of patience with people, right? And appreciate what I call the therapeutic use of profanity, which I was taught in CPE and chaplaincy. Sometimes certain words will only do.
Only for
When you're in
care.
pain, I
For
mean,
care.
there's just certain words, you should get permission to say them, right?
Fair
So,
enough.
as
Fair
they
enough.
teach you in chaplaincy, right?
That's good.
But we stopped being the policeman for profanity, right? Most of us stopped along the way, hopefully. I was terrible about it when I was in my 20s. I was like, 'cause I was trying to stop it, Go ahead, say something.
No, I want Matt to say
Okay.
something, because he's had some.
Also this week, there was another article, on the other side of the coin, they were talking about, a lot of Christian leaders were helping to determine Christian messaging for the administration and other politicians. So they're crafting messaging that rings in the, ears of a lot of
Tickles the ear.
evangelicals
Yeah.
and whatever.
Yes.
So that's kind of the opposite of
Yeah,
what, you were talking about. So that also came up this week as well.
Yeah, the exploitation of language by people who don't have the slightest clue what they're talking about, but they're trying to use trigger words. Yeah. Go
Fair
ahead.
enough.
So, I'm in the business of words.
Yes.
I would say an American tradition or American condition right now is on the left, on the right, we're in this propaganda war. It's just all propaganda. Words that trigger, words that move, the messaging that works. Just this text, this is actually about caring about people. Okay? You gotta first care about people as much as you care about yourself. And in Jesus' world, even more. Okay? And we are living in a moment where the religious right does not give a damn about people. They do not. I've chosen those words intentionally. They don't. They care about power. They want the power. I don't want power. I want more bread, more books, less bombs, less bullets. I've chosen those words intentionally because that's what I want. To me, I'm over here with the concept of if we are in a camp where we're choosing words to not hurt vulnerable people, I'm for it. And whoever's against it, I'm against them. I'm not there to monitor their language,
Right.
right? And I'm not there to have a language battle with them. But if I can connect with someone at a spiritual level because I choose my words in a way that makes sure I fully embrace their humanity, that's Jesus stuff,
Right.
right? It just is. And it's interesting. I was on a call this week, city council call. A friend of mine asked me to attend, and this call was about keeping a library open. Skillman Library. That's really what the call was about. And the city manager person who started, nothing wrong with her at all. She's doing her job, but she starts with this PowerPoint presentation that says in it, man, it's stuck in my head, for 10 years, Dallas has decreased our property taxes. Our property tax rate, 10 years in a row. She's growing. Good news. We have 120 people on this call trying to keep the library open, right? And I'm thinking to myself, hey, might not want to decrease that, to me, I'm just doing easy math, which is to say, one of these things is about community, right? A library is about community. A library fundamentally is a communal function. You look at the budget, the city budget, and we're cutting parks and libraries, and we're hiring cops. I'm the son of a cop. I like cops. Great, but this is built out of, this is fear-based. We're afraid, and we need protection, and these other things. You go to parks, you see people. You go to a library, there's people. You check out books, right? And it's just fascinating that we're on this call, and the city people don't understand. 120 people have gotten on a video call at 6 p.m. to say, you can't keep this library open, right? And I'm saying all that to essentially say, we're in a moment right now where conservative ideology, whether it's religious or not, is not communal. It's individual, and it's, I want to keep my money. That's what it is. And if we're not careful, we end up trying to opt into that kind of, Bill Clinton third wave into that. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because I just don't think that's what Jesus does.
Yeah, good, thank you for that.
This is not gonna be anywhere near as articulate, and I know we're all frustrated and losing our minds over kind of what's happening with government, but we do need to figure out, and the reason that we're hiring cops is because we voted to hire cops and close libraries, and the city is also struggling with, we're taking out all the DEI language, even though the city people that are taking it out want DEI initiatives because we need the money, from a city budget. And I'm good with pendulum swinging back and forth, but we're breaking the pendulum right now as opposed to pendulum swinging back and forth. And we need to figure out a way to talk about roles of, because I agree it's economic. We have all the discussion is around role of government and the economy and what we can afford and what we can't afford. And I completely agree that the reason we can't afford it is because we're keeping a huge amount in a very tiny percentage of the American population in their pockets. And that's a rant, but it's frustrating. And we've got to figure out a way to talk to people about, as a country and as a government, do we care about other people or not? Or are we just gonna all devolve into this every man for themselves libertarian?
Right. Okay, so let me close with two decidedly theological ideas before we go, and let me unpack them real quick. So in verse 11, he says, the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong, and you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. That's the then statement, right? If you can show this communal caring that God designed for you, this is what your world will look like. We don't have time to unpack this, but some of us have been reading this book I keep referencing called Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Thompson, right? Yeah. And the short version is a brilliant book. The short version is that it's basically a critique by center-left observers and participants about what the left needs to do to better address the future of America. And so there's a lot of economic language in there. There's a lot of environment. There's a lot of stuff in there. But you know, it's very stimulating to think about. And the big idea the title stems from is abundance, is a vision of abundance versus scarcity, right? And they make a big case about how the right has squarely sat down in a world of scarcity, and they use fear, as you already said. There's not enough, so we got to throw people off the boat, right? And when you distill it all down, they're just cherry picking groups to throw off the boat,
Right.
and we all know who they want to stay on the boat, right? And everything that's going on right now is to try to get, you know, the people on the boat that we all know they want, right? They contrast that with, the only remedy for that is a vision of abundance. And that is, it's not about carving up a pie that's a zero-sum game, it's about making more. And making more for everybody. It is a creation vision, right? Not a war vision. It's where, why are we talking about making more, creating more? Why aren't we painting a picture of the future where there is enough for everybody? And we're all focused on making enough. And their big argument is that the left hasn't concentrated enough on making stuff.
And I'll just add that.
So that's a summary, but it's a really intriguing book that makes you think.
Oh, just,
Go ahead.
what I thought was telling about the book is just the harnessing of nature was kind of infused in what they focused on: wind, solar.
Yeah,
water.
they're all about, I mean, on the energy, they have a big, complicated conversation about energy in the world, right? It's hard to reduce it down, but they think that the future is, you know, sustainable, right? And it's alternative energy, right? And you've got to figure out a way to do it. And now we can do it economically. It's cheaper now, and it's all this kind of stuff. So that's part of their energy conversation. But I just want to draw the biblical parallel between this well-watered garden where the water never fails, because this image of abundance is throughout Scripture. Abundance is not a theological book, but there are principles underneath there that as people of faith we see. Our God has always been talking about abundance for everybody, right? A land of milk and honey, right? I mean, it's always been about to him who believes, out of his heart will flow streams of living water, right? Jesus' promise of our experience of the Holy Spirit, right? Just unending. The church I planted in San Antonio was called the Springs, because I thought that was such a compelling metaphor for the spiritual life, right? So there's that one. The final one, and very quickly let me say, the final theological idea I want to lay with you is about the Sabbath. He says, if you refrain from trampling the Sabbath, from pursuing your own interest on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the holy day of the Lord honorable, if you honor it, not going your own ways, serving your own interest, or pursuing your own affairs, which is what Mike spotlighted early on. The bottom line idea is, it's not all up to us. And it's precisely the Sabbath practice that reminds us to rest in God. Not competing with one another for one more day, right? Not relying upon the labor of other people who make our Sabbaths peaceful. Because at this moment right now, the yoke is on a lot of people that are not resting, and we're benefiting, right? And so he tries to restore this biblical principle of resting in God as the foundation for all the ethical behavior that we're talking about. The Sabbath rest is the powerhouse, right, that constantly realigns you with God relationally every week. So you get in this rhythm of reliance, and then emulation. And then you come back and you rely again, and you emulate, and you rely, and you emulate, and you confess where you failed, and you know that's the rhythm that they should have been in, and it's not the rhythm that they were in. So I'll stop there. But great conversation. Thank you for being here. Who's teaching next week?